Thursday evening rolled around quickly, and Clyde was back in action. He only had a black eye, but other than that, he was perfectly fine. I was glad Clyde didn't die. He's living life on the edge, and I respect that. Around 6 o'clock Thursday evening, Clyde came by my house to pick me up in his car. Adeline was already in the car with Clyde. I hopped into the car reluctantly, awaiting the football match eagerly. "So how's school been for you yesterday and today, Leo?" Clyde asked as he sped out of my neighborhood and onto the busy main street. I was shaking my legs in excitement like a little kid, nearly avoiding Clyde's question. It's been good tonight. Sorry, I'm just excited for the game." "How come? You think something special is gonna happen?" "Yep, one good thing and one bad thing." I took a glance at Adeline and noticed she was dressed very fancily, very weird for this occasion, but I ignored it. Maybe she was feeling a bit free today and wanted to be a bit lenient on her clothing. I have those days too. "Hey, Clyde," Adeline started. "How are you feeling?" "Terrific? How am I feeling? Terrific. Just this darn black eye is making me feel a bit bad, but otherwise, I'm in the best mood I could possibly be in. And with the near eradication of Mr. Franklin from the city, everything is looking up." Clyde's words gave me more hope for the future. Mr. Franklin being eradicated seemed like a dream that would never happen, but now it actually seems possible. And I was going to be here for all of it. I knew there was still going to be that there were still going to be investigations far into the future regarding this horrendous case, but I was willing to give City Hall a helping hand whenever they needed it. But be prepared. I'm sure Mr. Franklin already knows about Gabriel's death and the retrieval of Mayor Xavier's body. Something bad definitely out to happen to happen soon, if not today. Mayor Xavier's body was retrieved. Since when did this happen? I was pretty surprised. So surprised, in fact, that I kept my mouth shut the whole drive to the Milwaukee's football stadium, the famous stadium where the football game was going to be hosted. Though we had to buy tickets, Clyde should be our ticket to get in without paying. The freeway to the stadium was heavily clogged and congested. A car flipped over on the road as cars were fleeing to the football game. I was surprised at the amount of people heading to the game, but I really shouldn't be. Greenfield High School is insanely popular. As Clyde, Adeline, and I stepped out of the car right before the massive stadium, I could feel a rush of excitement as I stared at this huge building. People were everywhere in the parking lot, completely consuming the sidewalk. This would be my first time ever going to a football match, so experiences like this were going to be completely foreign to me. "Where in the world is this entrance?" Adeline said as we were having trouble traversing through the crowds, bumping into somebody every few seconds. The only response Adeline receiving was "excuse me" because of the crowds. "Right over here, if we're able to get through these thick crowds," Clyde replied, though these crowds seemed endless. After 5 minutes of hell, we made it to the entrance. Though there stood two security guards admitting people into the stadium. Clyde, Adeline, and I all stood in line awaiting our admission, though the wait was about 40 minutes. "Hello, tickets please?" The security guard was holding out a scanner waiting to scan our tickets. "We don't have tickets, but I have my City Hall ID card, which should hopefully work just as well." Clyde grabbed his ID and held it to the security guard's face. "Clyde Smith, huh? You're taking these two in as well? What are their names?" "Adeline Lynn and Leo." Clyde cut himself before he said my real name. "David Martinez." "All right." The scanner beeped loudly as it scanned Clyde's ID as he wished us on into the stadium. I was surprised that my ID card worked. Normally you can't get into places like this with just a City Hall ID card. As we entered the stadium, I couldn't help but realize that this place was lively and huge. People were bopping their heads to the sound of music blasting in their headphones. Couples were holding hands, swaying around without a care in the world, and friends were laughing and joking around. Nobody here seemed to have a care in the world, and that's a positive atmosphere I love, though I have trouble contributing to it. I didn't know where our seats were, but Clyde told me during the car ride that we could pick any free seat, so that's exactly what we did. We climbed up the stairways and horizontal hallways intersecting each other between the many rows of seats before finding the perfect spot. "Who wants to grab some food while we can?" Clyde asked as he took a seat on the very comfortable blue chairs of the stadium. "I will," Adeline replied, "and don't worry about handing me some money. I have my own money. What do you guys want?" Whatever is most popular on the menu," Clyde replied. "What about you, David?" Same choice as you," I replied. "All right, I'll be back in a jiffy." Adeline rushed down the walkway, appearing out of sight in the swarming crowds. "You know what teams are versing at tonight's game, correct?" I asked Clyde. Whitnall Falcons versus Greenfield Hustlin' Hawks. Pretty neat names for two of Greenfield's biggest football teams. And the cheerleaders are going to be here at tonight's game. We'll see how annoying they get. Oh, they're going to be here? We're not going to be seeing how annoying they get. We know for sure that they're going to be annoying. Clyde chuckled. I don't know what time the game is going to begin, but all I'm looking forward to is the food here. Who is it? Best part of these games. The intercom bellowed that the game was starting in 5 minutes, but Adeline wasn't back yet. I was getting worried she wasn't going to return, but suddenly she did, holding 2 baskets of chicken fingers and fries and another basket of barbecue chicken wings. Sorry for the long wait. The lines were very long. Adeline handed Clyde and me our baskets of chicken fingers and fries as Clyde immediately began digging into his food. "You must be hungry, dang," I said as I began indulging in my food. They had a huge menu of food. You guys missed out. Adeline began digging into her chicken wings as the crowd silenced and as the football game began. The Whitnall and Greenfield High School cheerleaders stepped onto the field as the prelude to the game started. Though I didn't pay much attention to the cheerleaders' performance, I definitely paid attention when the first few members of the Whitnall Falcons stepped on the field, followed by the Greenfield Hustlin' Hawks on the direct opposite side of the field. Cheerleaders motivating them to win for their school. This crowd was drowned in applause as the game kicked off, but quickly switched to ecstatic cheers as Whitnall Falcons scored its first goal. "What team are you two rooting for?" Adeline asked, her mouth stuffed with chicken rings and barbecue sauce covering the rims of her mouth. "Greenfield Hustlin' Hawks," Clyde and I both replied. "Same. I didn't know we were all rooting for the same teams." The crowd went silent as everybody watched one of the Greenfield Hustlin' Hawks quarterbacks throw the football with such strength and swiftness and score an amazing touchdown. The scores were equal now, and tensions were high between the Whitnall Falcons and Greenfield Hustlin' Hawks. I think the Hustlin' Hawks are gonna win this match. Falcons don't have a chance against Terrence Marcota, the team's best player, Clyde said as he munched on his fries. The crowd was cheering on the Falcons, and surprisingly, not many people were cheering on the Hustlin' Hawks. Falcons eventually managed to score a goal, but that victory was quickly shadowed as Hustlin' Hawks scored another goal, and soon after another one, putting Hustlin' Hawks in the lead at 3-2. And the Falcons were beginning to show signs of letting up. But everybody in the crowd knew they weren't letting up. Hustlin' Hawks was trying, and it seemed they would take home a victory. And eventually, in the blink of an eye, the scores were 5-2. Hustlin' Hawks in the lead by 3. Despite the Hustlin' Hawks' huge comeback, not much of the stadium was cheering. Falcon fans were cheering on their team, but that seemed to not help whatsoever as Hustlin' Hawks managed to score another goal within 30 seconds of the last. Hustlin' Hawks are definitely going to win this game. That's a guarantee, Clyde said as he was cheering the Hustlin' Hawks on, nearly spilling his food everywhere as it shook violently in his lap. Even though the Hustlin' Hawks had been extremely concentrated and lucky throughout the majority of the match, the Falcons were beginning to come back. The scoreboards were 7-6. Hustlin' Hawks just barely in the lead now. It seemed like this was a highly unpredictable game, and it continued to be that way as Hustlin' Hawks just barely held on the first place in the game, eventually being interrupted by a thud of sounds followed by screams. "What's going on?" Clyde said as he hopped out of his seat, the game halting and the crowd erupting into sobs and screams. I could faintly make out the sound of a gun being shot and bullets ringing off the metal walls of the stadium. "Oh, great." Clyde and I really were right when we thought something bad was going to happen. I immediately realized that we shouldn't have gone to the football game, especially if Clyde and I both had the feeling that something bad was going to happen. And the shooter who was already on a killing spree at the stadium, Mr. Franklin, that snob. "Let's get the heck out of here. We need to leave before we get shot." Clyde ran down the aisles, blending into the panicked crowd. Adeline and I both got up and followed him out of the exit, people following our tracks to avoid not being murdered. "God, God, God," Adeline screamed as she hopped into the car with Clyde and me. Clyde fiddled for his car keys, eventually finding them and turning the car on. He sped out of the parking lot onto the nearby street, chasing behind a white van. The driver of the car, Mr. Franklin. How did he manage to get into his car from the opposite side of the stage? Only God knows. Behind us were police cars, and the police officers thought we were Mr. Franklin. We had to speed down streets and avenues if we wanted to escape the police and catch up to Mr. Franklin. "Clyde, are we gonna die?" Adeline whined as she grabbed her seatbelt hard. Clyde stayed silent as we reached our first stoplight. Though traffic was flowing fast through the intersection, if we wanted to catch up with Mr. Franklin, we were going to have to risk our lives and run the red light, which is exactly what we did. Now we were closer to Mr. Franklin than ever before, but because of us running the red light, there were more police cars behind us than ever before. Their sirens blaring and lights flashing. It felt like we were in a movie being chased by a fleet of police officers, but in this case, we were on the police officer's side, attempting to chase the criminal. The direction we were headed to, Greenfield High School. This is a red flag by itself, but Clyde continued chasing Mr. Franklin despite Adeline's wails to stop. Clyde should have listened to her. Soon enough, we realized that we, along with Mr. Franklin, were being chased by around 17 police cars. The alarms were deafening and the flashing lights were blinding. Clyde focused deeply on his driving, speeding nearly 100 miles down the 4-lane road. These roads were roads I could recognize, however. These were the roads that led up to Greenfield High School. "Leave the car now," Clyde demanded as we were within a mile of Greenfield High School. "What? Why?" I shouted through the loud sound of the tires rumbling under the rocky road. "Leave! Leave!" Clyde yelled. "Open the car door and jump out. Leave me behind. I'll keep chasing after Mr. Franklin. And if we both get in an accident, I want you both to survive. You're the last remaining branch of people I know that can actually take action against Mr. Franklin. Losing all of us would mean hell for the city and the world." Adeline began tearing up as she slowly opened the passenger door, the car slowing to a halt but still going around 40 miles an hour. I opened the passenger door closest to me, getting ready to jump out of the car. "Goodbye, Clyde," Adeline sobbed as she left the car and tumbled out on the side of the road. Adeline was the first to jump out of the car. I considered it for a few seconds, then jumped out myself. Because of how fast the car was moving, despite Clyde holding onto the brakes, I was thrown onto the side of the road and tumbled around on the nearby sidewalk. I could feel myself bleeding. I was hurt severely. I lifted my head up, eyeing Clyde's car. Police officers weren't following him anymore, and then I noticed it. I noticed that Clyde's brakes broke and his car kept continuously accelerating as it hit a brick building hard. I gasped so loudly when I saw the car light up in flames and the building tumble down. A large dust cloud was forming around the collision area, quickly approaching my position. I was so shocked that I wasn't even crying anymore. Clyde was definitely dead, and there wasn't any point in checking up on the area because anybody with a brain knows that he died. His car was completely wrecked, the broken car's taillights flashing red and bloody dust before going dead.